You can't be serious, Nathan Grant muttered as he looked at the waitress, a skeptical smirk on his face. I doubt you'll even understand what I'm saying. Nathan, the 45-year-old billionaire tech mogul, had made a habit of belittling the people around him. He ran his empire with an iron fist, controlling everything and everyone. No one could outsmart him, and certainly not a waitress. Emily O'Connor, standing beside him with her order pad, gave him a polite smile, though her mind was elsewhere. She wasn't one to be intimidated, but it was hard not to feel the weight of Nathan's arrogance. She had heard him mock others before. This time, it was different. He had ordered a rare, vintage wine at a neighboring table and was now asking for someone to translate the words of a foreign guest, as if it were some trivial task. You're telling me you can't even handle a simple translation? Nathan scoffed, tapping his platinum credit card against the table as he eyed her. Emily's eyes flickered toward him, but she didn't answer immediately. She had seen this before. Rich, arrogant men thinking they were superior to everyone around them. But she wasn't about to let him off that easily. I'll do it, she said softly, stepping forward, her voice calm but firm. The foreign guest, who had been speaking in an unfamiliar language, turned to face her as she approached. Nathan leaned back in his chair, a small chuckle escaping him. He was certain she would fail. Go ahead, impress me, he said with an air of amusement. Emily cleared her throat and nodded to the guest, who spoke a few more words. In an instant, her voice rang out in a smooth, fluent response. She didn't just translate. She captured the nuance, the cultural context, the essence of what the guest had said. Nathan froze. His smirk vanished, replaced with disbelief. Wait, did you just, he stammered. Emily glanced at him briefly, her expression unchanged. Yes, I did, she replied, her tone neutral. The shock was written all over his face. He hadn't expected this. How do you know that? Nathan asked, leaning forward, his curiosity piqued. Emily's eyes softened, but she didn't say anything for a moment. She just stood there, watching him, letting the silence hang in the air. Finally, she spoke. I used to study linguistics, she said, quietly, but I left when my brother got sick. I needed to take care of him. Nathan's gaze lingered on her, his disbelief still palpable. You're telling me you've got a degree in that? He asked, his voice a mix of surprise and skepticism. Something like that, Emily said, her voice quiet but filled with an unspoken depth. She had no interest in explaining further. I've got customers waiting, she added, turning away. As she walked back to her station, Nathan couldn't help but watch her. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite place. He had underestimated her, and he knew it. But what else was she hiding? As Emily walked back to her station, Nathan watched her every move, his mind racing. She had effortlessly translated the foreign language with perfect precision, leaving him speechless. He couldn't understand it. How could a waitress have that level of expertise? He'd spent years building an empire, working with some of the brightest minds in the world, and yet here was this woman who had, with a few words, made him question everything he thought he knew. He glanced at his phone, checking the time. His meeting was approaching, and he needed to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Emily. She was different. No one had ever spoken to him like that before, especially not someone in her position. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. Was she hiding something? Was she really just a waitress? He had to know more. He stood up abruptly and walked over to the bar, where Emily was arranging drinks for another table. His footsteps echoed in the quiet restaurant, the clinking of glassware providing a strange soundtrack to his sudden urgency. Emily, he called out. She turned, her face calm as ever, though there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Mr. Grant, she asked, her tone polite but distant. Can we talk? Nathan's voice softened, no longer commanding, but curious. I need to understand something. Emily nodded and motioned for him to follow her to a quieter corner of the restaurant. As she moved, Nathan couldn't help but notice the grace in her steps, the way she moved with purpose, despite her seemingly humble job. They sat down at a small table near the back. Emily folded her arms, waiting for him to speak. How did you learn to speak like that? Nathan asked, his voice low. Emily sighed, but her expression remained composed. I told you earlier, she said quietly. I studied linguistics. But that was a long time ago. Nathan leaned forward, intrigued. So you just gave it up? Emily looked down for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. Life doesn't always go as planned, she said softly. I had to take care of my brother. My family needed me. Nathan studied her face, noticing the flicker of pain in her eyes. What happened to him? He asked, his tone softer now. Emily hesitated, but then met his gaze. He's sick. He's been in and out of hospitals for years. I dropped out of college to stay home with him. I've been working to pay for his treatments ever since. Nathan's heart sank as he heard her words. He had been so focused on his own world, his own business, that he hadn't considered the struggles of those around him. Emily's story hit him harder than he expected. He had no idea. I had no idea, he said, almost apologetically. Emily shrugged, her expression unreadable. It's not something I talk about, she said, her voice steady. But it's my reality, and I'm okay with it. Nathan couldn't help but feel a sense of respect for her. She had given up so much for her family, yet she remained poised, calm, and unassuming. He had spent his life fighting for success, but what had he sacrificed along the way? You could have done so much more, Nathan said, almost to himself. Emily looked at him, her gaze sharp. I'm doing what I can, she said, and that's enough for me. Nathan was silent for a moment, his thoughts swirling. He had been so consumed by his own ambition that he hadn't even considered what truly mattered. He thought of his own family, his parents who had passed away, and the emptiness that often lingered despite his wealth. What about you, Mr. Grant? Emily asked, her voice pulling him back to the present. What's your story? Nathan hesitated. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to boast or project an image of invincibility. He felt vulnerable. I guess I've spent my life trying to prove something, he admitted. But I'm not sure what anymore. Emily smiled. Faintly, the first real smile he had seen from her. Maybe you should take a step back and think about it. Nathan nodded slowly. There was something about her, something that made him want to reevaluate everything he thought he knew. He couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of a change for him. But Emily had already stood up, a polite but final gesture. I have customers to attend to, she said. But thank you, Mr. Grant. Nathan stood as well, watching her walk away. There was something about her that intrigued him, something he couldn't quite place. And as he sat back down to finish his meal, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change, in ways he never expected. Days passed, and Nathan found himself returning to the restaurant more often than he had anticipated. He tried to shake the thoughts of Emily from his mind, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get her out of his head. Her intelligence, her quiet strength, it was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The woman who had once been just a waitress had somehow become the most fascinating person in his world. It was a Wednesday evening when Nathan finally decided to speak to her again. This time, he knew he had to learn more. As he walked into the restaurant, he saw Emily at her usual spot by the bar, taking orders and serving drinks with the same calm efficiency. He approached her slowly, his heart pounding in a way he hadn't experienced in a long time. Emily, he said, his voice a little more tentative than he expected. She turned, her expression unreadable. Mr. Grant, she replied, her tone as polite as ever. There was no hint of surprise, no judgment in her eyes. It was as if she had anticipated this moment. I wanted to apologize, Nathan said, his words coming out more quickly than he intended. For the way I acted before. I didn't mean to offend you. Emily raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He continued, I've been thinking about what you said, about your family, about your life. And it made me realize something. I've spent so much of my life focused on my business, on my success, that I forgot what it means to truly connect with people. Emily's expression softened just slightly, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. I don't know if you're interested, Nathan said, his voice quieter now, but I'd like to get to know you better. Not as a CEO and a waitress, but as two people who might have something in common. Emily looked at him for a moment, her gaze unwavering. She seemed to consider his words carefully, weighing them in silence. Nathan held his breath, unsure of what she would say. Finally, she spoke. I don't mix my personal life with my job, she said simply, her voice firm but not unkind. I appreciate your apology, but that's where I draw the line. Nathan's heart sank, but he nodded, understanding. He knew he had pushed too hard, too soon. I respect that, he said quietly. I just wanted to be honest with you. Emily offered him a small, almost imperceptible smile. Thank you, Mr. Grant, she said, and with that, she turned away to attend to another table. Nathan stood there for a moment, his mind racing. He knew he had probably just made things awkward, but a part of him also felt relieved. For the first time in a long time, he had opened up to someone, not for business, not for power, but just because he wanted to. It wasn't the answer he had hoped for, but it was real. As he sat down at his table, Nathan couldn't help but smile to himself. Maybe he hadn't completely figured things out yet, but he was starting to understand something important. That success didn't mean anything without the right people to share it with. Weeks went by, and while Nathan had respected Emily's boundaries, his admiration for her only grew. He found himself thinking about her every time he entered the restaurant, watching her with a mix of curiosity and respect. Emily remained as composed and professional as ever, never letting on that their brief conversation had affected her. He, on the other hand, couldn't seem to shake the feeling that there was so much more to her story than he had realized. He often found himself studying her movements as she worked, the way she interacted with customers, always patient and kind, yet detached from the world around her. Nathan couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to truly connect with someone like her. One afternoon, Nathan decided to take another step. He had an idea, an opportunity to show her that he truly respected her, without any of the pretense or arrogance that usually accompanied his business dealings. He walked into the restaurant, hoping to catch her on a rare, quiet moment. Emily was at the bar, scribbling notes on a pad between orders. When she saw Nathan approach, she immediately straightened up, ready to serve. "Mr. Grant," she said, her tone neutral. Nathan smiled, his usual confidence replaced by something more sincere. "Emily," he greeted her, his voice softer. "I wanted to do something for you. I've noticed how much you work here, how hard you try to make everything perfect. I know you have a lot on your plate, and I wanted to offer you a break. I have a property upstate, a cabin. You can have the weekend off, on me." Emily blinked, clearly surprised by the offer. "I don't need a handout, Mr. Grant," she said quickly, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I wasn't offering you a handout," Nathan replied, his voice calm. "I just thought you might like some time away, some peace and quiet. You've been working nonstop, and it's clear you deserve a break." Emily hesitated. She had never considered taking time off, always feeling that her responsibilities to her family came first. She had gotten used to working long hours, pushing herself harder than anyone could imagine. Still, Nathan's offer lingered in her mind. It wasn't a handout, it was a gesture of kindness, something she had never experienced from anyone in his position before. She finally nodded, though she kept her guard up. "I'll think about it," she said, but Nathan could see the spark of something behind her eyes. Uncertainty, but also a hint of gratitude. Nathan smiled and nodded. "Take your time. The offer stands whenever you're ready." For the first time in weeks, Emily allowed herself a moment to pause. She had always been the one taking care of others, never allowing herself to slow down. The idea of resting, of taking a break, felt foreign to her, but Nathan's genuine offer made her wonder if it might be just what she needed. As Nathan turned to leave, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just the offer of a weekend away. It was the small step toward understanding her, toward showing her that he saw her as more than just a waitress. For the first time, he felt like he was doing something right, not for his company, but for her. The weekend arrived, and despite her initial reluctance, Emily found herself packing a small bag, her thoughts swirling as she drove towards the cabin Nathan had offered her. The drive was long, the roads quiet and empty, the kind of solitude that felt unfamiliar but oddly comforting. She had never allowed herself a real break before. Her life had always been about work, about doing what was necessary for her family. She didn't know how to relax, how to be anything other than the person who had to keep things together. The cabin was tucked away in a forest, surrounded by tall, towering trees, the kind that made the world feel smaller, quieter. When Emily arrived, the peacefulness of the place hit her immediately. There were no distractions, no ringing phones or endless lists of things to do. The only sounds were the rustling of the trees and the chirping of birds. She felt her shoulders relax for the first time in years. The inside of the cabin was simple but cozy. A stone fireplace sat in the center of the room, and there was a large window overlooking the forest. Emily made herself a cup of tea, sitting by the fire as the evening stretched on. For the first time in a long time, she let herself just be. She thought about Nathan's offer, about the way he had treated her. It was so different from what she was used to. She had expected a man like him to be condescending, to treat her like she was beneath him, but instead, he had shown her kindness and respect. It was strange. She had never imagined that someone so successful, so powerful, would see her as more than just a waitress. The next day, Emily went for a walk, the air crisp and fresh, her mind clearer than it had been in a long time. As she wandered through the woods, she found herself reflecting on her life, on the choices she had made, the sacrifices she had endured. She had always put others first, always pushed herself harder than anyone could imagine. But in doing so, she had lost sight of herself. She had stopped dreaming, stopped thinking about what she wanted, what she needed. By the time she returned to the cabin, Emily felt a sense of clarity. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She needed to take care of herself, too. She couldn't keep sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of others. It was time to start thinking about her future. As she packed her things to head back, Emily felt a sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was open to the possibilities. She realized that she had more control over her life than she had ever given herself credit for. Nathan's offer had been a turning point, but it was only the beginning. The road ahead was hers to choose, and for once, she was ready to take the first step. When Emily returned to the restaurant the following week, things felt different. She didn't know how to explain it, but there was a new sense of confidence in her step. She wasn't just the waitress anymore. She was someone who had taken time for herself, who had realized that her own dreams mattered too. Nathan noticed it immediately. There was a change in her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, but it was there. It was subtle, but it made all the difference. "How was the cabin?" he asked as she brought his coffee. Emily smiled, her eyes brighter than usual. "It was exactly what I needed," she said. Nathan nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm glad," he said quietly. They stood there for a moment, the connection between them deeper than it had ever been. Emily knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She didn't know where it would take her, but she was ready to find out. The days following her weekend away, Emily felt different. There was a sense of clarity that had settled inside her, a new understanding of herself she hadn't recognized before. As she walked into the restaurant, the familiar sounds of clinking glasses, quiet chatter, and the low hum of background music filled the air. But this time, it didn't feel overwhelming. She was no longer just a part of the noise. She was part of something bigger, something she could control. Nathan had noticed it, too. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he could see the change in her. The way she moved with more purpose, how her eyes held a spark of something more than just the routine of her daily tasks. He found himself looking forward to their brief interactions. Each time he saw her, she seemed to stand a little taller, her presence more commanding. He couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking, what was going on in that mind of hers. One evening, as he sat at his usual spot by the window, he noticed her at the bar, laughing with a couple of regulars. There was a lightness to her laughter that hadn't been there before. It was as if she had finally allowed herself to enjoy the small moments, to embrace the simplicity of life. Nathan found himself drawn to her once more. When Emily came over to take his order, he smiled at her. "How's your brother?" he asked, genuinely interested. Emily paused, surprised by the question. No one at the restaurant had ever asked her about him before. "He's doing better," she replied, her voice soft but warm. "Thank you for asking." Nathan nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. I know you've been doing a lot for him." Emily gave a small smile, the warmth in her eyes reaching her lips. "It's just what you do for family," she said, her voice steady. Nathan studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. There was a calm in her now, a certainty that had been absent before. It was as if she had found peace, not just with her life, but with herself. "You know," Nathan began, his voice low, "you're not just a waitress, Emily. I've seen that for a while now." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" she asked. Nathan hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I've been in the business world for so long. I've learned to see things people often overlook. You've got something in you, something more than just what you do here. I think you could do anything you set your mind to." Emily blinked, taken aback by his words. She wasn't used to hearing praise, especially from someone like Nathan. "I'm just doing my job," she said softly, her gaze dropping for a moment. Nathan leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter. "I've seen people with degrees and power, but they don't have what you do. You're different, Emily. You've got something that they don't, and it's not just your intelligence." Emily's heart raced in her chest. She had never allowed herself to believe she was anything more than what her life had shaped her to be: a waitress, a caregiver, someone who had to work hard just to survive. But Nathan's words, his belief in her, made her wonder if there was more to her story. "You don't have to settle for this," Nathan continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "You could be so much more if you wanted." Emily felt a lump form in her throat, the weight of his words sinking in. Could she really be more than this? Could she find a life beyond the restaurant, beyond the endless hours of serving others? For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine it. She didn't know where it would lead, but she knew one thing. She couldn't keep playing small, not anymore. Nathan smiled, as if sensing the shift in her. "You don't have to answer now," he said gently. "But I want you to know that I believe in you, Emily. More than you know." As he turned back to his meal, Emily stood there for a moment, her thoughts racing. The seed had been planted, and for the first time in her life, she felt like the future was hers to choose. Emily sat at the small cafe table, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her coffee cup. The morning light streamed in through the window, casting a soft glow on the room. But despite the quiet comfort of the space, her mind was anything but still. Nathan's words echoed in her head. You could be so much more. Could she really? Could she take the leap into something bigger, something beyond the familiar world she had created for herself? For years, she had been trapped in a cycle of responsibility, doing everything for her family, putting herself last. She had accepted the label of being just a waitress, just a caretaker, and had never questioned it. But now, after Nathan's encouragement, she was starting to wonder. The weight of her dreams, long buried under years of struggle, began to stir inside her. She took a deep breath, glancing at the menu in front of her, though she wasn't really seeing it. She had always been good at shutting down thoughts of what she could be, focusing instead on what she had to do. But now, a part of her was ready to acknowledge the life she had put on hold. She could do more. She could be more. Emily had always loved languages. It had been her passion, something she had always wanted to pursue, but life had pulled her away. She remembered the days she spent at the university, studying linguistics, feeling alive with the possibility of mastering different cultures through their languages. It was a part of herself she had neglected for far too long. Nathan had opened her eyes to something new, something that had been there all along. She didn't have to settle. But what did that mean for her now? She thought about her brother, about the years of sacrifice. She had always felt that her responsibilities were her life's purpose. But now, there was a nagging feeling deep inside her that maybe it was time to start living for herself, too. But how? How could she begin? The answer seemed so clear, yet terrifying. She knew it wasn't going to be easy. It was going to take courage, and most of all, time. But Emily was ready. She stood up from the table, her decision made. The future wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. She had to take that first step, no matter how small. She walked out of the cafe with purpose, her heart racing, but this time, not out of fear. She was ready to pursue what she had always wanted. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like she could handle it. As she walked down the street, Emily's mind raced with possibilities. Maybe she wouldn't go back to school right away, but she could start small. Maybe she could find a language course, or even try translating freelance. It didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be a start. The more she thought about it, the more her steps quickened, her excitement growing. She knew this was the beginning of something new, something she could finally call her own. Emily's first steps into the world she had dreamed about for so long felt both exhilarating and daunting. She had spent the next few weeks researching language courses, signing up for online programs, and gradually integrating her passion back into her life. Slowly, but surely, the pieces of her former self began to fall back into place. She wasn't just working to survive anymore. She was building something for herself, something that didn't rely on anyone else's expectations. Her brother's health had stabilized for now, and while she was still deeply committed to caring for him, Emily had started to carve out time for her own growth. It wasn't easy, juggling everything at once, but each small victory felt like a triumph. One evening, after completing a translation project for a small local business, Emily received a message from Nathan. It was a simple text. "I've been following your progress, and I have to say, I'm impressed." Keep going. It was just a few words, but the validation from him, the man who had pushed her to take that leap, meant more than she had anticipated. It wasn't the first time Nathan had reached out since their last conversation, but it was the first time she felt like she could truly accept his praise without brushing it off. She was no longer just a waitress. She was someone who was actively creating her own future. Over the next few months, their interactions became more frequent. Nathan would stop by the restaurant more often, not just for a meal, but to check in on Emily. They would chat briefly, often about work, but sometimes about life. Their conversations were easy, comfortable, without the tension that had once existed between them. Emily found herself laughing more, her confidence growing with each day. Nathan, too, seemed to be changing. He was more relaxed, more present. It was clear to Emily that he was starting to see the world through a different lens, one where people's worth wasn't measured by their titles or bank accounts. One afternoon, as Emily took a break in the back of the restaurant, Nathan came by, as usual, to check in. This time, however, he had a different kind of offer. "I've been thinking," he began, his tone serious. "There's a project I'm working on, something international. It's going to require a lot of translation work, and I think you'd be perfect for it." Emily looked at him, surprised. "You want me to work on a project with you?" she asked, almost incredulously. Nathan nodded. "I've seen what you can do. You're more than ready for this, and I think you deserve the opportunity to stretch your wings." For a moment, Emily was silent, her mind racing. This wasn't just a small side project. This was an opportunity that could change everything. It was the kind of chance she had always dreamed about, but never thought she would get. She had spent so much time doubting her worth, questioning whether she deserved to step into something bigger than the life she had always known. But here it was, standing in front of her. She took a deep breath. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady. "I'm ready." Nathan smiled, a proud, almost relieved look crossing his face. "I knew you would be," he said. "You've always been ready, Emily. It just took you a little while to realize it." And with that, Emily stepped into a new chapter of her life, one that was filled with uncertainty, but also immense potential. It was a risk, yes, but it was one she was finally ready to take. She wasn't just stepping into a new career. She was stepping into the life she had always wanted, one that was fully her own. Emily's first major project with Nathan's company was a whirlwind of activity, deadlines, and new experiences. The international project required her to translate documents, meetings, and correspondence from several different languages. It was demanding, but it also felt like the most natural thing she had ever done. As the weeks passed, she grew more confident in her abilities. Her work was praised by everyone around her, and Nathan, who had always been supportive, was especially impressed by her professionalism and dedication. Their collaboration became a routine, with Nathan checking in regularly to discuss progress, but always allowing Emily the space to do the work her way. For the first time, Emily felt like her skills were being truly recognized, and not just for the job she had been doing in the restaurant. She had finally found a place where she could shine, and she was determined to make the most of it. One evening, after another successful meeting with a client, Nathan invited her to dinner to celebrate their progress. They sat across from each other in a quiet restaurant. The atmosphere relaxed, the clinking of silverware and the hum of conversation providing a comfortable background. "I want to say I'm proud of you," Nathan said, his tone genuine. "You've proven to everyone, especially yourself, that you're capable of so much more than you've ever given yourself credit for." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I couldn't have done it without your help," she replied. Nathan chuckled softly. "You did all the work, Emily. I just pointed you in the right direction. The rest was all you." Emily felt a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She had come so far from the quiet waitress who had struggled with self-doubt. Now, she was in control of her own future, and it was unfolding in ways she hadn't imagined. As they ate, they spoke of their goals, their futures, and everything they had accomplished. Emily found herself laughing more, enjoying the conversation, and not feeling the pressure she once had. The tension that had existed between them seemed to have disappeared, replaced by a comfortable camaraderie. It was clear to both of them that their relationship had evolved, though neither of them were ready to label it just yet. They were two people who had supported each other, challenged each other, and helped each other grow. As dinner came to a close, Nathan surprised Emily with another offer. I'm opening a new division for international relations, and I'd like you to lead it, he said, his eyes locking with hers. I think you're ready for it. You've got the skills, the experience, and the vision to make it work. Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was the kind of opportunity she had always dreamed of, but never thought would actually come to her. This wasn't just a job. It was a career, a chance to prove herself on a grand scale. I don't know what to say, she whispered, stunned. You don't have to say anything right now, Nathan replied with a smile. Take your time, think about it. But I know you're ready. Emily sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This was everything she had ever wanted, but it also meant stepping into a whole new world. A world where she wasn't just Emily the waitress. She was Emily the leader, the professional, the one who had earned her place at the table. The thought both excited and terrified her. But one thing was clear. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving.